I met Zander through Cindy Quinney, and was really happy to meet him. I've been reading his content online and have appreciated it. And as an educator, I just think, wow, this would be so great to use in classrooms to talk about a different perspective on Utah history. And so it's I think really needed. And I've shared it with a professor. I used to teach at Westminster University now, and I shared it with, in the School of Education. So I've shared it with one of the other professors, saying, wow, she works with future middle school teachers. So she really likes your content too. So anyway, just am happy that you can be here, Zander. The question that came up is, we talked about how, I don't know, maybe it's not difficult, but how it works with your culture and also the gospel and integrating. I mean, to me, that probably fits really well. And I don't know, however you do that, we'd be really interested in any Indigenous history that you'd like to share with us would be great.
I was going to say, if you want to introduce yourself for Zander, and kind of like what you do, and then kind of delve into that would be great. Yeah.
Perfect, Rachel.
So the question is just like, how do I handle sharing these things online with my background and everything?
Yeah, and also how, I mean, I think a lot, I may be wrong about this, but I've wondered if a lot of Indigenous people feel like they have to give up their culture when they join the church or when they participate in church. And so how have you integrated that?
Okay. Well, first off, it's awesome just being with like-minded people. Like, it's not common in the LDS world. And partly, I think it's just because people don't know the history. And so my story, so I'm from Utah. My name's Zander. I grew up here in Provo, and I live in Springville right now since second grade. And I served the mission in Denmark. I went to UVU and got a degree in digital media. And I'm married with 4 kids. And I've been working at an organization for the last 10 years, originally called Book of Mormon Central, and it changed its name to Scripture Central. And I ended up leaving them a year ago, and now I'm with an organization called Ancient America Foundation. But while I was at Scripture Central, like, I had the opportunity to travel all over the place with Casey Griffiths, a BYU professor. And we started a series where I was like the producer and he was the host. And it was called Restoration Revealed. And we basically started going through church history sites from beginning to end. So we went to Vermont, to New York, to Ohio. Then we went over to England, and then we went over to Hawaii. I even had the opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia with Scripture Central and just do a ton of like church history videos and learn it from one of my favorite scholars in the church, Casey Griffiths. He's so awesome. Yeah. And I started the journey kind of led towards Utah and Utah history. And I slowly started realizing that like the Native American perspective wasn't really being told in it. Like, for example, Saints Volume 2, it's kind of skips over the whole Native American conflicts and stuff. Really, it's just like a few sentences. And I started noticing that, but realizing that it was a huge part of our history too. And that got me interested. And another thing that got me interested in it was So I grew up here in Utah, and I'm not really a traditional cultured Native American. Like I wake up every morning and just, I think I don't even think about being Native American. I don't have a lot of connections. I mean, my mom is full Native American. She was part of the Indian student placement program, and that's how she got involved up here and went to school up here and met my dad up here. We have positive experiences with the program. And then we would go down to the Navajo reservation, once or twice a year as I was growing up. So I've been there a lot, but I've never really grown up with the tradition. And it was probably like a year ago, 2 years ago, where it kind of dawned on me that, hey, I have dark hair and brown skin, and when people look at me, like there's no choice but to wonder, is he Hispanic or is he Native American or what? And I kind of was like, okay, that is an important part of my identity that I'm just not really aware of. And sometimes it will surprise me if someone makes a Native American joke, or it'll surprise me if people ask me questions about Lamanites, because I hadn't really thought about it as much. But all these different things started coming together. That the videos with Casey Griffiths, and then also I think the TV series American Primeval that came out like two years ago or something. So I was involved with Scripture Central, and I was involved with answering hard questions, and Casey and I would make videos about polygamy, to the translation, to every hard question there was for the Book of Mormon. And when we watched American Primeval, I kind of realized that there's no one who's actually prepared to actually respond to those things. And so I grew up in like a LDS apologetic organization and saw that there was a need in that area as well. And so I just decided to dive into it, and kind of a personal journey for me to learn more about myself, to reconnect with Native American groups like the Gathering of Tribes and other people. And at first it kind of was, I want to be prepared to answer these questions, but the more I did it, the more I was like, holy cow, there's more questions here than I realized. There's more events or massacres or dark past that I knew, that I realized. And it hasn't shaken my faith or anything, but it turned out to be, this is a bigger project that I've wanted to do. And so diving into it, the question was, how do I kind of deal with all of it? It is interesting being having Native American heritage and being a Latter-day Saint, because sometimes it feels like I'm in between all different types of people who want me to say things a certain way. Sometimes members might actually think I'm an anti-Mormon or something because I'm being too direct or pointing something dark out. Sometimes like secular non-member academics might think I'm too nice to the church and too apologetic. But even on the Native American side, there's pushback as well, because I come more from like an academic perspective. Not that I'm an academic, but I love good history and research and stuff. And so that's my perspective. And so if I say that the archaeology shows that the Navajo people came from Canada and the Alaska area around 1000 AD, that conflicts with the Navajo tradition that they kind of came out of the ground in the Four Corners region, and that's tied to their claim to the land. So it's kind of, I'm kind of in the middle of a lot of different people and groups that want me to say things differently. The Timpanogos tribe has a very strong perspective of how history happened, which it might be different than what some researchers say as well. And so it's been nice being independent, because I'm doing this all on my own. It's not a Scripture Central project. It's not an Ancient America project. It's just by myself. So I've been able to be a bit more free in what I say and stuff. So that's kind of how it is. It's been kind of surprising learning some of the conflicts and the politics, because there's not just politics between, the church and the tribes. There's politics with the state and federal government. And then there's also lots of politics that I wasn't aware of between tribes. And, the Timpanogos tribe has one perspective, the Ute tribe has another perspective, the Shoshone tribe has another perspective. So it's kind of a very interesting part of church history to get into.
So I am wondering, like with you talking about, it's interesting. So it sounds like you were just starting to explore this yourself. As you're exploring it, because I think like our group, we've kind of dealt with having to like delve into, oh, this is hard to hear. What
Mhm.
do we do with this? What is your process for when you hear something that's hard? I don't know, like, what is your process for like learning more about it or trying to fit it within how that
Yeah.
fits within your faith versus how does it fit within the secular world? Or even with, if you have different voices coming, I
Yeah.
feel like there's so many different perspectives sometimes. What is your
Yeah.
process with dealing with that and working through that, and what does that look like for you?
I mean, I think especially a decade with Scripture Central and learning about tough stuff like polygamy and race in the priesthood. A lot of times I think the best way to cope with all of that is just realizing that there's really just a dozen or more solid doctrines that are core to our beliefs. And the rest of it is kind of policies or traditions or culture that have sprung up around it. And I think that all these solid truths in our church have remained intact throughout our history, despite, mistakes that have been made. And so there's a really good approach by BYU professor Anthony Sweat about determining what doctrine is and determining what core doctrine is versus policy doctrine versus esoteric doctrine versus supporting doctrine. That seems to answer a lot of questions for me. And so I think in a way we have to admit that, it's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but we have to admit that, in the 19th century, we had racist views and we lived in a racist culture. That doesn't mean the church itself, its core principles are wrong. They've actually been trying to pull us back in to the Christ and the church and the gospel, but we make mistakes along the way. And so I've had to and that actually happened a long time ago, so it hasn't really shaken me doing this. I've always known that, and so it doesn't worry me. I do think part of the job is to help people understand that, so that when they learn about some of this history, they got to know that it's not shaking the foundation. It's just pointing to things that we might need to fix in our history and culture. So that's one way. Another thing that really led me into this, though, was around the same time, 2 or 3 years ago, I read an essay by a Native American Latter-day Saint that was really critical of the Book of Mormon, and basically was stating that it was a colonization book, that its purpose was to just colonize. And I mean, there are some good points in it, but because I've had all this experience in research with Book of Mormon researchers, I knew that it's a common idea among researchers that the Book of Mormon peoples were likely a much smaller group surrounded by many Native American groups, and that even the Book of Mormon itself suggests this in quite a few places. And that solves a lot of these issues, like colonization, because that means that the Book of Mormon people can keep their history, and every Native American group can keep their history. They don't have to feel like the Book of Mormon's trying to replace their history. But in this essay, it didn't even mention this idea that the Book of Mormon peoples were a separate, smaller group. And that just told me, okay, so there's certain things like that concept that need to be promoted more in the church, because it doesn't just solve colonization, it also helps solve like DNA issues and dark skin issues and geography issues. And so part of what I want to do is try to help people understand those types of things more. So I mean, the part of the way I deal with this is to just kind of remember that there's really just a dozen or so core doctrines we believe in. It's okay if the history, if we messed up. And then another way I deal with it is there's actually lots of good research out there that people just aren't aware of that can help with a lot of these topics.
That's great.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I'm kind of thinking, you mentioned American Primeval, and I actually have found, I haven't watched it. I had one because I can't stand blood and gore. Like for the life of me, I can't.
Yeah.
But so I had one of my older sons watch it for me. That's how I deal with it.
I can't stand it either, but I force myself to do it on like 3x speed.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. So if that, like, and I think this is a viewpoint that is actually not just with American Primeval, but in general, I'm seeing more and more people talk about the violence of the pioneers, right, and the violence of the LDS group that came across the plains, and that it was much more colonization in nature, like you talk, like it sounds like, I mean, this, you know, that idea that there's this colonization aspect to what the pioneers did and who they were. So I'm just curious, from your perspective and what you've learned and studied, what truths are in that and what is over exaggerated, or maybe what is completely false in those, like what is currently being portrayed both in media, and I really truly have seen some people who legitimately are saying this is an accurate representation of what the Mormon pioneers were.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the film has like some aspects of truth. I mean, I do like that it portrays the West as kind of rugged and wild, and not this fanciful history where pioneers were just like holding hands coming into the valley. It was actually really hard. Another thing that got me into all of this was Butch Cassidy. I kind of became a Butch Cassidy nerd a couple of years ago, and like he's this rugged cowboy who grew up a Mormon in southern Utah, and I was reading about all these places he went to, and then I found out he was a Mormon. He was hiding out in areas that a lot of these ancient peoples in the Utah hid out in as well. And he was involved with run-ins with Native American people. And so that kind of got me into the whole Western side of Utah. And so I was curious if this film would portray it that way, but it turned out to be, it turned out to have an agenda to portray Latter-day Saints as this murderous cult. Like even to the point where they had like KKK hoods on them. But it also took like 3 different events: the Bear River Massacre, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and the Utah War, which happened years and years apart from each other, and it shoved them all into one event to kind of create this shock factor. And there was even a point where Mormon Stories, which is a podcast that's critical of the church. Even the host on there was like, yeah, it wasn't good history. And he had Darren Perry on there as well, and they were explaining the history behind it, and they were just talking about how bad the historical representation is. It is interesting though that I like the standard pushback to me is that, well, yeah, it's not accurate history, but you got to say that the saints were that violent, right? And I think the problem is it portrays every single Latter-day Saint as being violent, when I don't think that's the case. As I've studied, I've realized that there were groups of people who were violent, but it doesn't represent everyone, and that violent way of living was partly just the way you lived in the West and had to survive. And so I see a lot of things like that get conflated, and kind of why I'm doing this is I just want to put out good information to make sure it doesn't get conflated more, right? And so like another example is like the Black Hawk War, which I'm going to get into. It was Utah's deadliest and costliest war. No one knows about it. But in some books, it's portrayed as more fanciful and dangerous than it is. And so I kind of want to bring some better history to it all. That's kind of why I went and studied the Utah Valley War, the Provo River Massacre, the Battle of Fort Utah, to kind of figure out, okay, how did this happen? And as I dived in, I ended up having more questions than answers. But I also found out that Brigham Young tried to he didn't approve of them going to Utah Valley. They kind of just did it without him, and so he kind of just had to put his stamp of approval on it. So the people who went there were already kind of I guess renegades in their own way to begin with. And he even told the saints in Utah Valley several times to not get involved with the Native Americans. And that might seem harsh, but in a way, he might have just wanted them to leave him alone and not even talk or communicate with them, so nothing would happen. And it some of the stuff was kept secret from him, like the killing of one of the Native Americans, where the body was thrown into the lake by several saints. That was hidden from Brigham Young for a time. And so things like that is kind of like, okay, so it's not what people are saying, because even with Mountain Meadows Massacre or this, they'll say that Brigham Young purposefully intended for things to happen, but it's not like that. It's more complicated. It's hard to tell it because there are things we have to deal with as we do it, and it does kind of go against some of our ideas of a perfect Pioneer Day holiday where saints came into an empty valley and Zion was something. Zion was this perfect world when in actuality it kind of pushed out the Native Americans at the same time. And so I've found that there's got to be a bit of push and take from both sides, and it's going to be hard. And but I'm also just kind of a history nerd, so I just like learning about history. So it doesn't really affect my testimony because I just love that type of stuff.
Mhm.
I like driving around Utah Valley and just seeing Timpanogos Mountain for what it represented and thinking about the people that used to be here. So I think it's fine. I haven't really figured out an answer of how to actually reconcile it all, but I think that the beginning step is for me at least, is mostly awareness. Sometimes people ask me like, what are we going to do about getting a monument here or talking to the city representatives here? And right now it's kind of like I got a degree in digital media. I know how to record and edit. So my job right now is just to spread awareness and then see what happens. And slowly things will start happening. And maybe we'll get a monument built in on West Mountain or something like that. Or maybe we'll get 3 times as many people to the Timpanogos Walk next year or something like that. I don't know what it's going to be, but I think awareness is kind of what I'm pushing for right now.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely think that's the area where a lot of people are. Does anybody else? I actually wanted to talk a little bit more about the Timpanogos Walk, but if anybody else wanted to.
I just wanted to, Lasagna, are you there? Would you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Lasagna popped in.
Yeah, I'm Latanya. I live in Riverton, Iowa, and I'm just taking in the information.
Yeah, we have really good support people all over that are interested in the gospel and history and reconciliation and healing. So, yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions from people? If you guys do, you can just pop in. But Carolyn, do you want to explain a little bit about the walk? Because you guys were kind of like heading that up and just had it. And then Zander, I'd like to hear, I saw your video that you did with it, the little clip. And so just hear your experience with it. And I guess just anybody's thought. I wasn't able to participate. So, you know, I would love to hear how it went, what it meant to people, what it may look like in the future. I think even as an example of a way, I personally love the idea of the walk. I say this anytime I talk about it. I'm like, it's just such a deeply embodied experience to remember it in that way. So anyways, if Carolyn, you want to introduce first kind of what you guys did, and then maybe Zander, give your thoughts about your experience.
Yeah. And Morgan was there. So
yeah, Morgan was there.
Jump in, Morgan.
Hop in too.
Yeah. Well, I think it was 4 years ago, Ken Cox, who the descendants have heard from, he came and visited us just like you are doing today, Zander. And he talked about, he moved here from California. He's from Utah Valley originally, but he moved here and he wanted to do something to commemorate the early people of Utah Valley. And so he spent a lot of time working with Philip Godfredson and Mary Meyer on writing a narrative about the commemoration of the Utah or the Black Hawk Wars. And so when he did it the last 4 years, I guess it's been very small, or the last 3 years, it's been very small. Just he and his wife and a few friends have walked the 5 miles of this trail or not a trail, but different events happened in different parts of Provo. And so you walk through Provo and talk about those events. He'll stop and tell the group about what happened here. And he actually reads the narrative because he wants to be really accurate and true to what Mary Meyer and Philip Godfredson have to say, their perspective of what happened. So that's part of it, that 5 mile walk. And then the second part, he always had people over for dinner at his house. So it was really small, grassroots. And this year, the descendants wanted to be involved in helping him advertise and helping him put it on. So we rented a gallery in Provo and had the walk, and then we all went over to the gallery. It's called the Compass Gallery, and had a dinner and speakers. Mary Meyer spoke. She's the head of the Timpanogos Nation, and Philip spoke, and Mary's brother, and there were other Timpanogos people there who spoke, and they seemed to be very pleased with how it went. We had capacity. We probably had 50 people there and we were supposed to have 40. And then like a food truck from the Timpanogos Nation, they're called the Tabby Shack. They came and they served food for those who wanted it. And it was a donation to the tribe to buy the dinner. And I think it was very successful in that they were able to tell their story, and the audience was very curious and listened and were highly participatory in the conversation, and very, I guess, empathetic to what is going on and what has happened to the tribe over the years. And it's a sad story. So, Morgan, do you want to add anything?
I don't know if I have anything to add. I thought it was really interesting. I honestly didn't know much about the history going into it. I had, participated in Zoom calls with Mary and Philip, but I didn't know a lot of like the specific stories and a lot of the specific facts. So it was a real learning opportunity for me. And really great to see community turnout, especially at the discussion. I was not expecting that many people there, that many questions. So yeah, it was great, really great experience for me. And I brought my mom with me, and she also has not really been aware of this history, and she also found it very impactful. So I'd say it was a great success, at least for me and my family.
Yeah. Oh, and just to add that next year, Ken Cox wants us to be involved again. Mary wants it to be bigger, so we're hoping for that.
So yeah, Zander, whatever you can add to that story, to your experiences with it, would be great.
Yeah. Well, it was actually really awesome to finally be able to meet Mary and talk with her for quite a while. And now her and I message back and forth all the time about random stuff on Facebook. And so I think she's just a super nice, caring person. And I was really happy to make that relationship and to also see more members of the Timpanogos tribe. And to finally go to an event like that was great. I could only make it to the beginning of it because I had a birthday party to make in the afternoon. Next time I'll probably focus more on getting to the actual presentations to see how that goes. But I mean, I think more people can come. I mean, I brought Casey with me, and he'll sometimes give students extra credit if they go to something like this. And so that's easy, like 50 students just from his class, right? I had a great experience during it. Afterwards, I did get an email from the Timpanogos tribe that was very kind of like concerned about how their story is being told and the way I tell it as well. And because the video I did after, I think it's probably because of the little reel I did afterwards, because I had Mary next to me and I filmed other tribal members, and they want permission for things like that for now on. And so they're obviously concerned about how their story is told. And I think this is kind of another example of how there's different perspectives. And if I lean more towards historical records that don't always agree with what they're saying, they get concerned about that. And I'm not saying they're wrong or right. I think their voice needs to be heard. And I think whatever the details are, the trauma is real and needs to be dealt with. But it's such a touchy subject with strong perspectives on every side, opinions on every side, where I could see more BYU professors being willing to do it if the claims were grounded in more documentation, or I mean, like for example, do we know if there was a dozen people killed at the Provo River or if there was 50 people killed? Right? I try to say 12 to 50, but 12 is horrible. Well, no matter what, but differences in that and statements like that can mean a lot to people. And so I guess I'm kind of saying it was an eye-opening experience where I can kind of see how hard it's going to be to bring different groups together. And I've seen and heard other stuff on the back end between all these groups: state, federal, church, tribe, and it's hard to get them to work together. And someone needs to find some common ground, right, without sacrificing the other group's feelings or history or perspectives. And so the experience itself was great. The communication afterwards was a bit surprising, but I knew that would happen going in. I already knew a lot of the politicalness before all of this. But that communication was more from their PR person, not from Mary or any of the tribal members.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Morgan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, you kind of already touched on this, but one of my maybe issues going into this walk was I'm a history student, right? And there's a lot of focus on written documents, right? Like the written word is like a tool of the Western world and often a tool of the oppressor, and it can be really difficult, right, interacting with especially Native tribes where they largely have oral history and oral tradition. I just wondered if you have any thoughts about how maybe in the past you've reconciled written documents that we have, like we give way more power to and way more focus on, reconciling that with oral tradition and oral history that we don't think is as trustworthy, but is still valuable in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I think the Timpanogos tribe has an amazing hand already, just from Latter-day Saint records. Like, we already have details of some bad things happening that there's no reason to overplay the claims, because they're already bad. There's no reason to say there were hundreds of deaths. So I think there's already a case to be made with the written documents. The question is, what about the oral histories? Like, for example, on their website, they say that Brigham Young squashed up glass and put it in their flour to feed them. And that is a story that one of them heard from their grandparent, but there's no documentation or anything like further than word of mouth. And so I've found that it's important to like take these oral traditions into account and the written communications and see where they line up. And I mean, like, I've noticed, like, among the Navajos, there are traditions of a northward migration. And maybe that's the part of their oral history that we can all agree on. And so where we do see similarities, we can point it out. And I have seen historians write that way, where the account says this and this. Interestingly, the oral tradition also says this, right? Same thing happens with the Mountain Meadows massacre, where you have accounts that say the Paiutes were involved, and then you have the Paiutes oral traditions that say they weren't involved. And it's hard. And I don't think I really know the answer, and that's kind of why I'm doing this and trying to figure it all out myself. But I think where there is some similarities, I think it's important to point out. and it's also important to learn the other side story too. I mean, I have, for my video about the Battle of Fort Utah, someone gifted me The Black Hawk War by Gottfredson, and I appreciated it heavily because it gave me a perspective into their, like, how they think right now and what are the concerns they have. And so I read it that way, and then I took its information that also agreed with this information here from another book, and then just kind of melded it together into one. But so I don't know the answer. It's really difficult because then you are intruding on people's sacred stories, and that's really hard to do. You know, part of the reason I'm doing this is it's less bad looking if a Native American does it to another Native American, and a bit worse if a white person is doing it to a Native American. So that's kind of why I'm doing this. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Real quick, because I just thought I'd say something about that, and then listen, you can go. I'm not a historian, and so I value facts and I value those kinds of things. But I actually look at that story that you just told, Morgan, and for me, that tells you something about maybe not necessarily accurate facts. Who knows? Because again, who knows? But it does tell you about what happened and how it impacted them. So irregardless of whether glass was thrown into the flour, what it tells me as a white person, and actually even as a descendant of Brigham Young, like, oh, wow, they are carrying with them a history and a story of this malice, this pain, and whether or not it's true or not, it doesn't matter, because obviously it's still impacting them. So that's like my perspective on that. Like, facts are important, but it's also important for me to know that they're carrying this pain with them about what happened. So I guess that's how I would integrate that particular concept. Okay, Lasonia, go.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate it again, hearing this perspective, because I sat in on a couple of these different meetings, and especially with in regards to indigenous communities. And I find it very interesting that there's a pattern across all of them, and it's always the same. There are the oral histories, but there's the part that there's definitely the trauma, there's the lack of acknowledgement, I think, and a lot of it because people are left to assume when they don't get all of the history. They don't get the information, whether it's oral or whether it's documented, and you're only getting one side perspective, and knowing that the other side has information and is not willing to share that information to do what you're saying, which is, let's bring this together, have a common ground, and find out what exactly happened, because a lot of it is family history, because there's things that is in documentation that people have written about, but a lot of times there's family information that isn't received, that's in our Bibles, that's in our in our family members that have information. I do a lot with winter quarters, right? So I deal with the other side, and I got into it, like you said, it was by accident. But as I did, I found how involved my own family is in this whole story, and to find out things that where even I looked at it and I thought, say, for example, my grandmother, understanding how all the slaves came through the South, a lot of that is such a cutout history that isn't talked about. And I thought forever that my grandfather was white. Well, it turns out, oh, he was white, but he had a Black mother. And the way they hid and buried records, um you didn't know, but grandma or auntie knew somewhere down the line. And so you start taking in all of these pieces and you find all of these connections, and that may be not what the church has. That may not be what is written that is out there. But when you think, oh, well, nobody has this oral history, and you find out the church does have it, it's in the archive. Well, what good is it in the archive? And then you create books like Come Follow Me, and you come through and you're only telling, like I heard you mention about saints, you're only giving a snippet. Well, where's the rest of the story? You're picking and choosing what information you want to share and what information you don't, whether it's because that's the ugly side of things and we don't want to talk about that. Well, when we decide that we don't want to talk about something because it's ugly, then you leave people to assume, and you leave people to be hurt and stuck in their traumas because they clearly know there's something missing and it's not being talked about. And it's like a tree, right? A tree has roots. If the roots are so important, that's the storage area of information. And all you ever are focusing on is the branches and the leaves, which in the winter, we know they fall off, they break, but is the tree dead? No, the tree's not dead. There's stuff in the roots. But if you never discuss the roots of the problem and all you ever focus on are the branches and the leaves, then you leave people to not be able to heal. People can't reconcile if the front half of the reconciliation is missing. So I just loved what you shared, and I've heard this over and over. It's the same things. Like everybody is telling the same pattern over and over and over. And especially when it comes to Indigenous and African Americans or BIPOC, this is the same thing we're running. This is the wall that we're running into. And until we get everybody on the same page, that includes pulling out what's in the archives and putting it all on the table, laying all the cards on the table, we'll never get to the bottom of this. There is no reconciliation.
Yeah. Yeah. And to add on that, I think the job of a historian is to actually come to these records knowing that the people had a bias on them. Like, we just can't accept these records as 100% accurate. We've got to assume that Latter-day Saints had a bias and we're telling things to make them look good. And I don't necessarily think that has happened enough. The other thing is, we should, if we hear an oral tradition, the historian should try to find information that can support it. And I think that's what Gottfredson has done pretty well in his book, is he had found decent sources to bring up some things to show that what the Timpanogos tribe was saying about something was accurate. Doesn't happen all the time, but he does point it out. And another thing I'm finding is with Gathering of Tribes, I met with them and they pointed this out to me, is they are doing the the Navajo Oral History Project, where they're going to elder Navajos on the reservation and recording their stories. But they pointed out to me that it's also important to get the stories from pioneers, because they might have recorded a detail about a Native American ancestor. And that's valuable to Native Americans as well. And so there's likely pioneer documents that can help shed light on people, on Native Americans' ancestors. And I met with a guy a couple weeks ago who he wrote a book about this, but he said he's from the Blanding area in south east Utah, and his family came into that area as Mormon pioneers. And he said there's a story of his mom out in the middle of nowhere in the cabin alone, and a group of Native American men going to her and demanding food. This is like in the 19th century, and kind of being confrontational about it. And she like slaps this Native American man on the face and scares him, and he runs away. And later on, the same guy comes back and is a bit more polite, and she offers him food, and it turns out he's like the chief of the Paiute band down there. And then come to find out that they actually end up becoming good friends. And then she is actually murdered by a criminal, a European Caucasian criminal, and the settlers in the area couldn't put a posse together fast enough, and so this Native American chief and his band decide to create their own posse because they could do it right then and there, and to go after this murderer. And the we don't know exactly what happens, but the murderer is never heard of again. So they assume that the Native Americans got justice on him. And he went and found records about all this and went into the city archives and was able to show a lot of this story was true and accurate. And that just shows a story about a Native American man that people might have not heard about before.
No, I love that. I love the idea of sharing stories or pulling out stories and helping those stories to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Any other last questions? Yeah, Carolyn.
I'm just, so we are working, trying to find a path that might help rescind the extermination order, which what Mary has hoped that we could help with. And there are a lot of other people trying to help with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we're one of the groups it is. And I don't know if you'd have any advice. We have thought of, we're trying to meet people that might help us and develop relationships with that. But if you'd have any advice on that.
Yeah. I just know it's really difficult because, Latter-day Saints had an extermination order on them, which we have harped up a lot in our history and made a big deal to Missouri to actually rescind it, and they did. But that now Latter-day Saints have had an extermination order on Native American tribes, and so it looks really bad. It's hard to deal with. At the same time, was it technically called an extermination order, and was it actually written as a policy or as basically a letter by an unofficial representative? And who said the words exterminate and things like that? And there's also the whole thing of the language specifically says to exterminate hostile natives and to spare the women and children. It's bad no matter what, because it is basically like I don't know if it's genocide, but ethnic cleansing of the area. And so there's a whole lot of technicalities involved. And was it the state who said it? Was it the church who said it? Was it Brigham Young or Parley P. Pratt who used it? Was it General Wells who I am starting to wonder about his personality, because I think he was the same general who I think did one of the worst massacres at West Mountain. And he later he didn't become an apostle, but he became a member of the first presidency, I think. So I don't know where to begin with that one, and it's hard because I've seen professors at BYU plaster the extermination order on their departments, and it comes off really, really antagonistic against the church. And so there's got to be a way to do it without coming off as like an anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
But also doing it in a way to respect the Native Americans. The other difficult thing is if it's how far we go in this, because you know how the Timpanogos tribe is historically classified under the Utes.
Yeah.
And now they're saying they're Shoshone. Well, that involves more than just words. That involves politics and funding and land claims. And I'm not. They actually might be Shoshone, but it would mean that maybe the Utes don't have a claim. If we validate Timpanogos existence in Utah Valley, then we might also cause these politics to get worse between the Utes and the Shoshone, right? Because I'm sure it matters whether Chief Wakara or Chief Blackfoot, who are these prominent figures, I'm sure it matters to both tribes if he was a Ute or a Shoshone. That's part of their history too. So that's all to say, I don't know. I don't know the right answer. And that's why I'm kind of leaning to just spread awareness, and maybe people like you and others will help figure it out. I am reading a really good book called Cross Purposes. It's more about the Constitution, but the author points out how what makes our church so great is having lots of conversations behind the scenes. And so the church helped promote a Fairness for All Act and compromise in Utah as well.
Yeah.
And that was really like the result of several years of the church sitting down with the LGBT community and the religious community and just talking. Because if on the public side everyone is attacking each other and calling someone anti-Mormon and calling someone else woke, no progress will be made. And so I think getting people to sit down and talk to each other and listening to each other is a big step to helping it get rescinded in some form in some way. Because I'm sure the church, I actually think the church would like to do a lot of this stuff, and I even might suspect that part of the reason they might not have put the whole Battle of Fort Utah in Saints Volume 2 is there is political drama between tribes, and it could go into lawsuits and lawyers for all we know. And so I would imagine they want to, but they care about their public perception. The Timpanogos tribe cares about their public perception. So do the Utes, and so do the Shoshone. And so I guess maybe the one big step is people just need to talk. The right people need to sit down and talk for a while, for months and maybe years for something like that to happen.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that overall has been what the advice that's been given.
Meanwhile, I'm going to be like the guy poking the bear in the back. That's my job.
We need all people.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Any other thoughts, ideas? Zander, appreciate you coming and talking to us. It's always just insightful to talk with people and their points of views and help us learn a little bit more. Also. So
thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yep. All right. We're meeting next week, just my family, just FYI, just to talk. But other than that, we're good.
Yeah. Thanks, Zander. Really appreciate what you're doing and you being here.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.